Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to our last author speaker series in the spring. A quick introduction for myself and authors before we get to our incredible speaker for today. So my name is Si Zhu, a PhD student in UMD's College of Information and the series coordinator for this year. A little information about us. Authors is the organizational teams and technology research society, a network of scholars across DC area dedicated to researching and learning anything and everything to do with teams and technology. So it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Professor Susan Simpkins. She is a professor of industrial organizational psychology at the Pennsylvania State University. She leads the teams cognition and time lab. Her research focuses on team cognition, team composition and diversity, and the role of time in the team and leadership research. Her most recent work applies these research topics to human-robot teaming. Please hold questions to the end or use chat for the questions. So take it away, Susan.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and I'm delighted to be here. I think having a group on organizational teams and technology is super cool. I wish we had such a group here at Penn State, and I understand it's Susanna's brainchild, so I think it's just wonderful to have that. Today, I'm going to be talking about some conceptual work. So I'm not going to be presenting any data at this time, but some conceptual work I'm doing on the topic of accurate, up-to-date, and shared knowledge, a human-robot team cognition framework. I will say at the outset that this is a work in progress, so I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts and so we can have a dialogue towards the end. So I will say that I have been interested in team cognition since my graduate school days, and I was just fascinated all those decades ago with this notion of the combination of team member diversity and unity, that members come into a team with very diverse perspectives and expertise and backgrounds and thought worlds and personalities. And yet they have to arrive at a collective decision or perform in a collective way together. And how does that happen? How do you get unity out of all that diversity? And so my interest in team cognition and my trajectory of work over the past several years has kind of fallen into four big buckets. I would put it in that way. The first one was really laying the foundation, because when I got started, and this is way back, way back in the Stone Age, so to speak, it was not even a construct. We didn't even know if it was a real thing, the notion of team mental models or team cognition. So my early work was really just very bare bones. How do you define it? How do you measure it? How do you distinguish across different types of team cognition? And then I kind of switched to what I felt was an unexplored content area in this whole area, which was the temporal element. We paid a lot of attention to what members should share in terms of content, and then how they should interact together in terms of the task work side, but not very much on the temporal side, the time work side, which is when things are going to get done. And I was doing some work as well on the fact that there are a lot of temporal individual differences. People enter teams with different temporal orientations. And so the clocks that time us are not the same in teams, and that can cause some friction, or it can actually work to the team's advantage. So I was doing some work on that and recognizing the need for teams to converge on time is not you can't just assume that. They actually have to pay attention to that area of content and get on the same page when it's needed. And then the third bucket was integrating a fragmented literature and updating the theoretical development years after the initiation of this construct in the literature, in the OB and industrial organizational literatures. So I started to notice that there were a lot of simplistic assumptions that weren't parallel with the way teams were actually working in practice, and then the need for a lot more sophisticated research questions that we really weren't addressing. And last but not least, the focus of this talk, which is human-robot interactions in team cognition. So I'm going to be kind of combining the third and fourth elements here to address this issue and let you know of some of the thinking that I've been doing in this area that, of course, is still under development. So what I want to do is give you a brief introduction to team cognition, talk a little bit about robots, and then the need for this work, lay the foundation for that, talk about the human-robot asymmetry, and then get into the framework, and then a little bit on future research, and then take some of your questions and have that dialogue. So just to start off, just a brief introduction to team cognition. When you think about one of the simplest team frameworks that we have out there, it's called the ABC model of teamwork, and it includes attitudes, behaviors, and cognition. So it's identified as kind of one of the top three topics in the team landscape. This notion of how members exchange information and are they on the same page with regard to team relevant content. So the importance of team cognition is that theoretically it's implicated in many different models of teams that we have on adaptation and shared leadership and implicit coordination. I mean, they all include cognition as a very important element. And team cognition has actually been recognized as one of the most noteworthy developments in the team research from how it started, where we really weren't sure whether it was even going to take, whether it was going to take as a concept that's not just a metaphor, but actually a construct. And then also in terms of how do you measure it? And of course, if you can't measure it, it's not going to really go anywhere in our literature. So all of that was kind of very dicey at the beginning, and then to see how it's progressed over the years has been really an amazing journey, actually, personally, and then as a field. So empirically, there are some meta-analyses that have established that team cognition uniquely and over and above other team emergent states like cohesion and team processes, it predicts performance and other team processes. And then practically, a lot of the lack of getting on the same page has been implicated in team performance breakdowns over many different contexts like space missions and surgical errors and so forth. So the team cognition literature has been quite a mess. And I can say that as one of the contributors to the mess. And I have had team researchers, come up to me over the years and say that they've dabbled in many different types of team work and team constructs, but they won't touch team cognition. And ironically, a lot of it's because there's been a lack of shared cognition in the shared cognition literature, which is very unfortunate. And so these are 10 constructs, while all under the umbrella of team cognition have been like ships passing in the night, essentially. They've been siloed literatures with very little cross-referencing, actually. If you're, for example, a team situation awareness researcher focusing on whether members have accurate knowledge of the environmental context and are on the same page about that context, you're most likely not measuring team learning, or you're not measuring whether members share distributed expertise, a shared awareness of who knows what we call a transactive memory system. So the problem with this is that there's this ongoing tension between unity and diversity. It's what really drew me to this area starting in graduate school. Fascinated with it. The reason you have teams in the first place is because of diversity, but it's because of getting on the same page that you can move forward as a coherent whole in this area. And so if you have all these siloed literatures, you're really not addressing some of the very complex and important and quintessential questions in the teams area and this team cognition area that we should be paying attention to, like how do teams manage this tension between unity and diversity that's always there. How do you avoid getting too much on, the diversity side so that you kind of are more fragmented than you should be? And then how do you avoid groupthink and, too much commonality, and you got to maintain that balance there. And the reality is we don't know from this literature. The team cognition literature has very few answers to offer with regard to this space. And so this motivated us to come up with this integration, across these various areas, because that's where the most promising future research lies, is at the intersection between these various constructs. So we came up with this integrative definition of team cognition, which was a bit of doing because, again, there was a lot of lack of shared cognition in the shared cognition area. And even though we have those 10 constructs and they were all defined within their various literatures, this overarching umbrella term of team cognition had been kind of a catch-all, and nobody was really paying a whole lot of attention to what is that. So we defined it as knowledge building processes, which are things like information sharing and learning. This is the knowledge building activity that you engage in, which then produces an emergent mental representation. That things like team mental models or transactive memory systems that capture sharedness or distribution of knowledge or expertise. And then the degree of convergence. So you can range from all the way from zero, no overlap at all, to 100%, which is complete overlap on that range. And then the content is things like team relevant knowledge, whether it be taskwork, teamwork, or timework. So we work to try to organize these types of team cognition into whether they emphasize more of the convergent side of the equation, the sharedness, similarity, or whether it was more divergent or focusing more on unique knowledge, the distributed nature of the knowledge across team members. And then also whether it's more cognitive process or cognitive representations. And as you can see, most of the emphasis in the literature has been on the emergent and resulting cognitive representations after you've done the process activities like information sharing and learning. And then most of the literature as well has been on focusing more on the convergent side, our team members on the same page. So what is it that members share, or what actually needs to be shared? And there's a whole list of various variables that you can look at. And this has been actually, much of this content has been in different literatures, which again have been siloed and fragmented. So putting it all together in this framework was our unique contribution. It's kind of taking all of these different siloed literatures and putting together this what needs to be shared, or what should be shared, or what is shared, depending on your research interest. So objectives, goals, strategies, the task work, the team interaction side of things, the knowledge side of things, or the temporal context, to name some examples here. So what we did was, instead of trying to maintain those 10 separate siloed literatures, we tried to bring everything together into an integrative conceptual framework revolving around just 3 questions. So what is shared, or what should be shared? And that's the knowledge domain. That's the slide I just showed in terms of these various types of content that have been represented across the literatures. The second one is the focus on more the sharing process? Is it more on things like information sharing and learning, or is it on the shared outcome, things like the team mental model that results, or both? So which aspect are you focusing on in your respective study? And then the last one is, what is the degree of sharing? Are you more on the divergent side, the convergent side, or does it depend based on some contextual variables that you're looking at? So we really tried to distill down this literature to make it more simpler in terms of the framework guiding it. But the goal of this simpler framework is to allow us to address more sophisticated questions that we couldn't do if we maintain those 10 different siloed literatures. So questions like who should share with whom? Um, a lot of the literatures are really assuming that everyone should share everything at all times with everyone else. And we know when we say that out loud, that can't possibly be true. But a lot of this literature wasn't was really assuming that essentially, because when you aggregate to the team level and you're weighting everybody the same and you're assuming everybody has the same level of influence and everybody's opinion is valued the same in the aggregate, when we know there are all sorts of uneven contributions and uneven influence happening in the group. So who should share with whom? Different subsets of team members may have different degrees of overlap and appropriate overlap depending on various contexts, the team type, the task type in the team. What should be shared? Not everything, because again, if you're sharing everything, then what's the use of having a team in the first place? So different knowledge domains will have different degrees of convergence. And then how and when should it be shared? Different conditions, the different moderating conditions influencing this knowledge convergence or divergence, and then the different times across the team's life cycle that members should be more divergent versus convergent. So that's the backdrop. And when you think about different types of mental models, there's different types of content that has been looked at over the years. The earliest chapter on team mental models, again, this notion that you should get on the same page regarding relevant team content, was from 1993. And they looked at 4 different types of team knowledge, which included an equipment model. And this has been addressed perhaps more in the human factors literature, but in the IO space and the organizational behavior space, it's been given the least attention of any of these types of content. And then when we looked at what knowledge should be shared, and we looked at compiling all of these different types of content across literatures, technology was certainly on the list, but really hasn't been given a whole lot of attention in our space in the team cognition literature. I really liked Susanna had a recent paper on technological diversity and the fact that, in teams, you're always trying to figure out what software to use. And, you can assume, like, if you assume everybody uses Zoom, then you find some people like Teams better and all of these different things. So you're navigating that space. But part of the technology is on AI and robotics coming up. So that's what I want to focus on is robots in this space. I will say that I think my interest here is really largely driven by grant research and what I have been funded to do, which is actually robots more so than the AI space, at least now, but I am getting more into some of the other space as well. So when we talk about robots, we're talking about a physically embodied system capable of enacting physical change in the world. And people have unique responses to robots as opposed to the non-physically embodied agents. So embedded AI, for example, that doesn't have kind of the physical presence. And so some of the unique response is there's increased compliance, in part because you just have that physical manifestation there. There's some more learning gains that have happened when they've compared some AI, embedded AI versus these physically embodied robots. And sometimes the preference is for robots over the sometimes the embedded AI. And because their physical presence, motivates distinctive psychological processes that you're not getting in some of the other types of agents, robots have the higher potential to be considered teammates as opposed to AI or or agents in some studies. But it all depends on kind of, how you're defining teammate likeness. We'll get into some of that. And also what the capabilities are of robots and AI regarding autonomy and adaptability and things like that. So we're looking specifically at robots. Some of the work I'm going to share does overlap some with the AI space as well. So why focus on human-robot team cognition? I want to mention here at the outset that a group of experts doesn't make an expert team. We know this from the teams literature that just adding another team member, as bright and as talented as they may be, doesn't guarantee that you're going to have a better team. And in fact, just getting a bunch of bright, smart people together and expecting great results without anything else, just relying on smarts, is not going to get you very far, because the teamwork does absolutely matter. And the same is true of onboarding robots in teams, that just because you have a robot that's very impressive in terms of capabilities does not mean that the team is going to automatically be advantaged. In fact, it may actually cause more harm than good if robots are not properly integrated into the team structures. So that's something that needs more attention in this whole space, is that a lot of the gains in AI and robotics have kind of been more individually oriented, and less attention has been given to the whole coordination mechanism piece, which is absolutely critical in teams. So what is it how is the robot going to advance the team as a whole? If that's the question, then the whole coordination aspect, and how is the robot going to be onboarded into the flow of the work, and how is human workflows going to be adjusted, adapted because of that robot being onboarded into the team. So those are the important questions. And at the crux of all of that, these coordination concerns, is cognition. So a key factor in determining the successful integration of robots into the team is how knowledge is collectively represented. And that's been identified as important, both in the team literature, which is calling for researchers to reconsider the assumptions of team cognition to see if they align with robots and AI and the integration of them into the team processes. As well as the human autonomy teaming literature, the human robot interaction literatures, or the human robot teaming literatures, which identify team cognition as this key variable influencing the effectiveness of teams. But given all that, despite all these calls for this work, our understanding of how team cognition impacts the human robot teaming is fairly rudimentary. In these more technical literatures on human autonomy teams and human robot interaction, HRI and HAT, they have identified that they constitute more of a haphazard collection of independent and dependent variables, the way they conduct their research. And there's been this call for theoretical models that can contribute to better empirical testing, or more guided by theory empirical testing. And so that's where we're starting, is trying to contribute to this literature in giving more of a theoretical framework to start off with. And the team cognition literature, as I just mentioned, it's been criticized for a lot of fragmentation and needing to bring together various types of team cognition within the same space, rather than just study kind of one at a time. And the human autonomy teaming literature has also kind of done the same thing, kind of studied single types of cognition with not a whole lot of overlap between the two, or multiple types. So what we need here is 2 points of integration, at least. One is to integrate multiple forms of team knowledge across the breadth of team cognition, but also to integrate across literatures. And so 2 literatures I'm going to focus on here are a comparison of human-robot interaction in team literatures. So if you look at the human-robot interaction literature, they have a very sophisticated understanding of the influence of robot features in human interaction. They understand and have all these different types of studies to show that what some would consider small details, like even how many times the robot blinks, and the facial features and the voice and whether it's gender neutral, all of that matters, in a big way, in terms of results and how people perceive the robot. In the team literature, we have a fairly rudimentary understanding of robots and technology. It's sort of like a robot is a robot is a robot. Well, not really when you look at this more sophisticated literature on the tech side. In the human-robot interaction literature, the focus tends to be on one robot and one human in a dyad, whereas the team literature would not really even constitute a dyad as a team, which is more like three or more members because of all the different interactions that happen when you have three or more that don't happen when you have a dyad, like coalition formation, things like that. The HRI literature is top down in a lot of ways. It tends to be very structural and it has a very static approach to teaming in general. A lot of times they're manipulating variables like team communication. Um, and they kind of have a unidimensional view. So they're pre-assigning tasks and roles to humans and AI based on their respective strengths. And it tends to be, again, static because a lot of this is manipulated at the beginning, but some of these things change over time. So, for example, communication in the team literature is very much viewed as bottom-up, emergent, dynamic, and similar views of cognition. One is more kind of top-down, static versus bottom-up. And the whole goal of the HRI literature is to improve robot design. That's really the ultimate goal that they're shooting for. Whereas in the team literature, it's to improve effectiveness. And so how can we integrate the strengths of both of these literatures so that we get a nuanced and sophisticated view of robots, a nuanced and sophisticated view of teaming and the team processes as kind of emergent dynamic approaches to teaming, and putting these two together to get both goals where you get implications for robot design, but you also are improving team effectiveness. So that's kind of the ultimate goal to shoot for. Now, that said, humans and robots have a lot of asymmetry here in terms of complementary, parallel, but complementary and unique differences. So in the humans have their intentional agents with beliefs, motives, accountability, whereas robotics is more designed artifacts. So they're not equivalent social actors, and they differ in these capabilities, roles, expectations, and so forth. Humans have superior contextual judgment, intuition, adaptability, but robots have kind of more an AI superior computational speed, precision, and memory. Whereas humans excel at ambiguity and sense making, robots, AI is more structured, data intensive types of tasks. The way that they learn is different. Humans through experience, reflection, socialization, whereas AI is through programming or machine learning pipelines. And in the end, humans are moral agents with accountability, whereas robots, AI, are really not fully accountable for what happens. So that's the general human versus robot. If we look more specifically at different cognitive representations, you have humans, their mental representations are shaped by social and experiential learning based on senses and perceptions, whereas in robots, it's these computational representations based on these mathematical models. And then humans are often self-aware about what they know, why they're making certain predictions. They reflect, articulate the why behind things, whereas robots and AI, they often lack self-awareness. And then for humans, cognition and emotion are intermingled, and whereas the robots, they can have cognition without emotion. So that's the difference, and that's the challenge of how do you then have humans, robots get on the same, how do you have humans get on the same page about the robot? And then as we go further in all of this, how do you have the robot get on the same page um, with humans? And so that's the essence of things. So I want to just talk about this framework that we've been wrestling with and um, getting our heads around more and more. Some of the assumptions I'm going to be making underlying this framework is we're talking about three or more humans and one robot, although, again, we can have multiple robots as we go further in this work. We're assuming task-oriented teams that require interdependence between robots and humans. And then also we're kind of paralleling robots and humans with complementary but asymmetric skills. All right. So what we're looking to do here is to integrate three dimensions of team knowledge. And these three were selected in part because of their import both in the team literature, but also the HRI literature and their import for considering the integration of robots, in teams. So they are the three dimensions we're focusing on: the accuracy of team cognition, the question of are members correct about robot capabilities, and then the sharedness of team cognition, are members on the same page, about the robot. And then the updating part, which is, are they adapting to the changing situation with the robot? Do the members change, with the changing situations? So this brings together three types of knowledge: distributed or more complementary, what we call compilational knowledge. The sharedness part is more overlapping, or what we call compositional knowledge. And then the updating piece is more the dynamic, changing piece. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each one and then kind of put them together. So the whole notion about accuracy is coming to a shared an understanding of what robots can and cannot do. What we're trying to avoid is overestimating robot capabilities, which results in robot misuse, and it can cause errors and accidents because the robot's being used improperly. Whereas there's underestimating, whereas that results in robot disuse, and it undermines the efficiency because the robot hasn't been utilized to the full capability. And a lot of times robotics is expensive, and so that's not helping the company get their money's worth out of the technology they're employing. Individuals make assumptions about robot intelligence based exclusively on outward appearance, as some of the literature has shown. And so this can lead to overestimating quite easily. And that's part of what is the necessity of getting on the same page about the accuracy and being right, about what the robot actually can and cannot do. So the accuracy of team cognition has to do with, are members correct about robot capabilities? And also, can you trust that knowledge? Can you trust what the robot is doing or not doing? And of course, errors are going to undermine that trust over time. But what is it to be accurate about? It's things like robot knowledge, skills and abilities. What's really important is boundaries and the limitation of robots. I've done some of the work in construction robotics, and if you take that robot outside, that may, not be up to the capabilities of the robot. The robot may only be able to be used in the warehouse, for example, and uneven terrain. It may not be able to navigate that, or even heat and certain temperature constraints. All of these are important to understand. And where are those likely failures given your task and your team structure and the robot intent and things like that. So I'm not going to go through all of these. These are just a sampling of the different things that, depending on your context, it would be important to get accurate, to be accurate about what the robot can do and cannot do, given the level of automation and what it's actually telling you or not telling you, the black box of the processing. Regarding the shared cognition, it's in addition to being accurate about the robot capabilities, are you on the same page? Or some members actually may think the robot is accurate and others don't think it's accurate, and there's discrepancy in how they're thinking about the robot capabilities. So that would be the second step is, in addition to the accuracy of the information, are you sharing that knowledge across team members? An interesting uh, part of this is the perception of the robot on this continuum from tool to teammate that has gotten a lot of play in this literature. And so I wanted to, I'm going to mention that towards the end here and give you a little bit of more meat on what I'm thinking there. But that's an important question is, do members actually need to be on the same page regarding how they're viewing the robot, whether it's more tool-like or more teammate-like? So another aspect about sharedness is the task work, what needs to be done, these task strategies and procedures. A lot of times members not only need knowledge about how to use the robot, but where to use it. And if their members are not on the same page regarding those different aspects, then that may be problematic. The environment, the situation, the constraints are also important to consider here. Members should agree on or how necessary is it to understand what the robot is perceiving, what it's comprehending, and then also, are you projecting into the future of how you're going to use that robot? Also, some other aspects are the whole team interaction. It's more the teamwork side of things. How is the work going to be accomplished? And this is really critical because what role is the robot going to play? What role are the human members going to play around that? Is someone, maybe just one team member, going to babysit that robot, or is that needed? Or is it multiple team members that need to interact with the robot? So all of these things need to be taken into account. Understanding the robot role in the team action and information flow of things would be really critical. And then the whole time work aspect, the whole temporal aspect of when should work be accomplished. This is really interesting to me because a lot of robots, because of safety reasons, are slow. And so this whole aspect of trying to be quick and maybe sometimes assuming that the robot is going to actually help speed things up when it may not to the extent that you want it to, given its speed. And then especially when you're under time pressure. So going back to this issue of tool versus teammate, a lot of the assumptions are being made in the literature about robots being teammates. And you see this in various articles. So a central question is the role of robots as teammates. They kind of assume that even in asking that kind of question, or a more definitive statement like much research assumes robots are becoming teammates. And so we see this a lot in the HRI space. And in fact, some literatures, actually, whole bodies of research are assuming tool versus teammate. So CSCW is computer-supported cooperative work. And this review article on robots in groups and teams said that that whole field conceptualizes technology predominantly as a tool. And then in contrast, to CSCW, HRI, human robot interaction literature, really goes the opposite way and instead really assumes more partnership, its peers, its partners, or just teammates, essentially. So it's really interesting that these assumptions are being made. Because a lot of the work to actually validate these assumptions is not happening. So actually looking and seeing what members, how they are actually perceiving the robot, or in some cases AI, as more of a team versus a tool. There's a recent article in Press at the Academy Management Review by Liu and Yan, where they break out these different types. Instead of just having tool versus teammate, they look at tool-like AI as having low autonomy and low adaptability. Assistant-like is low autonomy but high adaptability. The opposite, the flip of that, is the rigid teammate-like AI, which is high autonomy and low adaptability, and then the teammate-like AI, which is high autonomy and high adaptability. So using, again, autonomy and adaptability as sort of a 2 by 2 to break out these different types. But in between the tool and the teammate might be these assistant-like or rigid teammate-like that we can look at as well as terms of more fidelity in how members are viewing the technology, specifically robots, and whether they are in agreement with one another. And is that even important to be in agreement on it? Because I would say yes, in some ways, because it depends whether you assume you assume it's a tool and the robot fails, it's going to be probably different than if you assume it's a teammate and the robot fails, things like that, or changing circumstances. I think these have the potential, these labels, these assumptions have the potential to affect how members see how things unfold in the team. And then last, but certainly not least, is this changing situation, our members adapting to the changing situation with the robot, and updating both the knowledge, whether it's accurate or not, whether it's credible or not, as well as whether they are on the same page. These are all always moving targets in a team. There are a lot of contingency factors here to be considered. I'm just giving a bit of a sampling here. Team characteristics, the level of interdependence certainly matters. How much is the robot needed for the team to perform effectively? That, of course, matters. Whether the humans are more in a position of validating, checking AI, checking the robot on scrutinizing the accuracy, that's going to affect cognition and the different aspects that I mentioned, accuracy, updating, and sharedness. The number of human operators as well, and the whole network of the knowledge distribution. How many operators of the robot are they, in addition to how many team members there are? All of that is going to affect things. And then human characteristics, the tenure, how long have you been interacting with that robot, the number of people, the teammates that you have, the amount of help that you have, with the robot or lack thereof, and even attitudes that you come in with about the robot. Domain experts can better infer robot, the taskwork model and evaluate its outputs compared to novices. And then there's the whole robot-related factors, like the level of autonomy, whether it's full manual control to fully autonomous, the level of adaptability, as I already pointed out in that 2 by 2, and then explainability, what's the black box here? Do you understand why the robot is doing what it's doing? And then certainly the record of robot reliability is going to matter. So when you put all of these 3 dimensions together and you look at the human's cognition of the robots, starting at the individual level, it's the accuracy about whether you're not overestimating or underestimating, but are you accurate about what that robot can do and its capabilities and the operating procedures and the constraints and the boundary conditions, and is that knowledge being updated? And then if you have multiple team members, then it's the sharedness part. One of the things I think is really important here is those key questions about who needs to share robot information with whom and breaking it out that way, because it's likely that it's not necessarily everybody in the team that will need to have that. Maybe everyone needs to have some sort of a rudimentary knowledge of the robot and its capabilities, but in terms of some of the more specifics, it may be boiled down to one member or a dyad or a triad in the team that may need to have more overlapping information about that robot. What robot information needs to be shared? It's likely not everything, so in being very specific about that. And then when does that knowledge need to be shared? It can be too early, it can be too late. How do you get it, right on time? All right. And then the other side of the equation from what are humans' cognition of robots is what are robots' cognition of humans. And no, it doesn't make sense to talk about robots having cognition in the same way humans do, as I mentioned before. But it does make sense to talk about the robot cognition as this set of computational analogs that enable goal-directed behavior in teaming contexts. So that's the focus here. And as robotics is increasingly being infused with AI, that's going to become more of an issue, more of a thing right now, more of a thing than it is right now. And it's typically cognition in AI and robotics is typically defined more functionally by what the system can do, perceive, reason, learn, plan, adapt, rather than whether it, is exactly like the humans, which it's not. So I just want to make that clear. So robots' cognition of humans, you have the same kinds of parallel issues of the accuracy of that knowledge, the updating of it. And then if you have multiple robots, are the robots kind of on the same page about humans in their cognition? So a little bit more detail here. The first order mental models are a mental model of the human teammate, like what is my teammate's reward function, for example, what reward are they seeking? So that would be an example of the first order mental model. And then the second order is the robot's mental model of the human's mental model of the robot, which is very confusing, but it's more like, what does my human teammate think of me, essentially. So these, I think, will get more play as robotics continues to advance. But it also, again, just comes down to these critical questions, again, about who should share with whom and what should be shared and how and when should it be shared. Those are really critical questions. And then largely, but not exclusively, our model focuses on what do humans think of robots and then what do robots think of humans, but recognizing that in the middle column there is a single mental model that is shared by both humans and robots together. So this more dyadic combination of the humans and the robots together. And then looking at it as a whole of the outcomes that are produced with some of the contingency factors there that will condition or mitigate some of those linkages there. So how do we onboard robots and teams so that they are accurate about the robot's capabilities, on the same page about who's going to do what and when, and updating that knowledge so that when the robot makes errors, that knowledge is updated to benefit the team rather than harm the team. Lots of future research to be looked at here. Technologies movement from exogenous, a lot of tech is moving from exogenous to endogenous within that, even though right now, I think the cognition literature really portrays tech as more exogenous objects, external, rather than endogenous, which I think could change things quite a bit. And AI and robotics increasingly becoming more endogenous in terms of mutual learning and sharing and things like that. And then tracking the development of human robot cognition over time is so critical to look at what robot failures, the effect that they have on team cognition, the changing nature of the interactions, and how humans adapt to them. I really think qualitative research, especially since we're more at the outset of some of this, trying to figure out some of this, is very useful from a methodological fit standpoint. It's appropriate a lot from the beginning of a research area, but of course, combined with the quantitative in a mixed research model that triangulates across findings. And then we need more team cognition measurement, which is very cumbersome, even without the introduction of robots, that has been called for just in the human side of things. We have kind of very cumbersome types of ways to look at measurement from more of a network standpoint, which is the strength of this type of measure where you're asking members to rate every other concepts in the map or rate every other member in the team as to what they feel like, whether they're on the same page with that member. So they are very hard to fill out. People don't like to do it. And so we need some new metrics there. Ultimately, the big question is how do we leverage the strengths of both robots and humans to collaborate productively while avoiding serious and unintended ethical and practical consequences. And so that, of course, needs a whole lot of attention as well. In closing, I just want to mention that it takes a team to do team research, and I'm grateful for my graduate students working with me, as well as some undergraduate students that help in the lab and help run the lab. I'm very grateful for grant funding from Office of Naval Research, from the National Science Foundation, and I thank you so much for your very kind attention here today.
Thank you so much, Susan. This is a very fantastic talk. We'll now open it up for questions. The audience can unmute to ask questions, or you can post the questions in the chat or Q&A sections. And for the sake of recording, I'll read your questions as they come in and post them to our speaker.
Thank you.
So if you want to ask questions, you can raise your hand and we can unmute you, I think. Hey, Luis, can help me unmute Susan Winter?
Hi, Susan. This is Susan Winter. Sean, can you say a little bit more about robots being endogenous versus exogenous? I know what that means in terms of running a structural equation model, but what does that mean in terms of the sort of mental model? Or were you thinking more structural equation modeling?
No, I was thinking a bit more about the let's see, let me just pull up that slide so I can look at this. Thank you for the question. And let's see. Yeah, so tech in general is moving, from more exogenous to endogenous, and both the cognition coordination literatures, they portray it more as tech is more exogenous objects, external memory holders, but the movement of AI and robotics, probably more AI than robotics at this point, but it's more becoming part of the actual teamwork functioning, and not so much as a side element on the outside of things. So a lot of AI and humans, you're conducting searches together, you're doing more of a hybrid problem solving, mutual learning, for example. You're coming up with strategy, you're strategizing together in real time. So that can illustrate how these tasks and roles, evolve in ongoing kind of adapting to one another in there. So it's becoming more embedded, in the actual team, and team members may be becoming more interdependent with AI, with robotics, as time goes on. So less viewing it from just kind of an outside thing that's kind of an add-on that you consult, at maybe more random times, and more integrated into the nature of what's happening in the actual team as it goes along. Thank you for your question, Susan.
Hi, Luis. I think Rabia also have a question.
Hi, Dr. Simkins. This is Olivia. You're
Hey,
nice
Rebecca.
to. Hi, Dr. Simkins. I really enjoyed your talk. And I had a question. You mentioned something about the accuracy of team cognition, where the people need to be aware of the robot's capabilities. And I was wondering how much of the reverse modeling is needed as well, where the robot needs to be aware of people's capabilities, or is this just information a one-way flow that's important?
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. That's a great question. So in our modeling, we were both looking at the humans, whether humans are accurate about the robot's capabilities, but the other way around, in our model, we also have the robot, are they accurate about humans' capabilities in there? So I think that's a parallel issue that I think as robotics advances even more, that will become more and more of an issue. So yes, the robot should have that understanding in part to be able to adapt and help coordinate that team and help provide real-time assistance. They need to have more of an understanding of, an accurate understanding of whether what the humans know and don't know, and what some of those points are that where they can intervene in a valuable and important manner. Thank you for your question, Rebecca.
Yeah. If you have any questions, you can also put it in chat. I think Susanna have a question.
Sure. I really enjoyed this talk and I might go back and rewatch it. There's one question I've had. Honestly, this is just because you're sort of the preeminent team cognition scholar I know. There's one question I've often had, and it has to do with team metacognition and its place, and it does how it relates to AI and robots, but also in general, like as an example, transactive memory systems often seen as what's the divergence? Like, what do you know that I don't know? But then there's the metacognition that we all know the shape of what you know that I don't know, right? Like I know that, Rohit Malik knows human-centered computing better than I do. I don't know the content of exactly what he knows, but I know the metacognition of like I know what he knows generally. Um, my first question is, how does that fit into the conceptual frameworks that you've talked about? And the second is, how do you then apply that to things like robots and AI, where like how would you model a robot having metacognition about what the humans should know, even if a robot or an AI doesn't actually know like anything or know what exactly the form of it or the content of it. Does that make sense? I feel
I
like I
think
need
so. I'm
more
trying
more
to.
words for these. Thank
No,
you.
it's a fascinating issue of this metacognition. So, it sounds like it's very similar to the notion of a transactive memory system, which is the kind of the shared awareness of who knows what. Is that? I guess it's somewhat similar to that. And um, sorry, you're asking how?
Right. So the first question is, it was something like
Yeah,
transactive memory system, which is
yeah,
conceptualized really as a kind of divergence where,
yeah,
Amy
right,
Kate knows things I don't know,
yeah,
and you know things I don't know,
right,
but you have to have the meta knowledge, which has to have similarity of we're all
yes,
on the same page that you know that thing,
right.
right? So there's this sort of other layer of commonality in addition to the divergence. And so then how does it map into one of the conceptual models? And then how do you then apply that sort of mixed two-layered team cognition onto then applying it to human robot teams or human AI teams?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. I think that it is that mix again between divergence and convergence and the mix of that. So that I think that's a great example of the fact that the tension is there, that there is that divergence of knowledge. And even like, what does the robot know? I don't have to know how the robot is doing all this stuff. I just have to know that it does this and it does it well. And that way, it's kind of that external memory aid that I just have to know that. So that's why this knowledge, getting the accurate knowledge of that is important, of what actually does it know and what is it credible to have that belief about, that it can do certain things, but also the shared awareness of that, in the team is part of that. So the transactive memory system actually combines a bit of both, even though it's kind of been dubbed more on the distributed side of things. But that meta knowledge and how you build that is absolutely critical. And I think many times learning from people in industry and how a robot is just shows up in a team, or AI shows up in a team. They're not given any real instruction and training. I was just at the Society for Industrial Organizational Psychology conference, listening to people in industry. Some of my former students talk about they're expected to use AI. They're expected to use it. They're actually getting evaluated on how much they use it. No instruction on how to use it. No instruction on where it should be used. And yet they are just, expected to be doing all this stuff, and no time given in their job to actually learn it, and what we know from learning things is there's usually a dip in performance when you're learning something. You get it wrong and you learn and you recover, and none of that is being, accounted for. They're expected to perform at the same level. So how taking the time to actually train this, members actually sitting down, talking about what the robot can do, being trained, that's the ideal. And developing this cognition about what that robot knows or doesn't know. And then as we go on, having the robot actually be trained to know what the humans can do, can't do, is key to that. Yeah. But again, this is kind of some of this future work. Yeah. Thank you. This is a fascinating question.
Thank you.
Okay. So we are a little bit past the time, but we still have two questions. Susan, do you have time to answer this
Sure.
question? Yeah. So Rohit asked a question like, can we improve the inherent differences in team cognition with artificial agents, with co-design or participatory design methodology, or does that break down the benefits of team diversity you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, kind of goes back to that balance of unity and diversity. And that's going to depend on so many different factors, where that is. So, helping to get on the same page. Let's see. So the inherent difference in human cognition with artificial intelligence, does that break down the benefits of team diversity? So it depends on, again, how much commonality do you have and how much is needed. So I don't think in itself it needs to break down the diversity. It could be, again, these complementary skills being put together, but how much commonality needs to be around that to make it flow well in the team. That's a really important consideration. But I love the question.
Thank you. Sorry, I could have phrased it a bit better. I was kind of
Okay.
curious on like the inheritance issues almost with like co-design, where when you were designing an AI agent, are you transferring your own mental processes, like how you approach a problem and things like that, and trying to encode that into an artificial agent? And I was just kind of curious on whether that's something that's
Okay.
useful, or if it's going to break down like the thing that actually makes human AI teams so useful is AI processing things their own way there versus humans their own way as well. So I was just curious about that element. So
Yeah, wow, that's really fascinating. I thank you for explaining that. Yeah, I think that there's so much changing, that even doing it at one point in time, to get I don't think that it's going to take away that diverse element because it's constantly adapting. And of course, if you're talking about AI and generative AI, that's adapting too. So I don't foresee that, being particularly problematic. Yeah, but it's an empirical question in essence. So yeah,
Absolutely.
thank you.
Thank you for
Fascinating questions.
Yeah. Jessica has a question. The definition of teams in the literature so far emphasizes the human side only, like a team is small number of people, blah, blah, blah. How the current approach changes the definition of a team.
Yeah, that's very fascinating. Even before, even if you don't consider robotics, there is conversations about how the definition of teams should be changing and evolving. It assumes a lot of static right now, static, and things are dynamic. So some of the current definitions are two or more people, but I don't know a top level journal that would accept a Teams article that was just dyads. So I think it needs to be like three or more members. Now, the interesting thing is, would the robot constitute one of those members? I think that's fascinating. If you had two members and a robot, is that, in itself a team? Is the robot or the AI considered that teammate on the same level as a team member? And even if it's not, does that still constitute a team in and of itself? I think that's fascinating to consider. I don't know the answer. I think a lot of this stuff is evolving, and we shall see. In terms of, you do this work and then you submit it to a journal and get the reviewer comments on it. But I think that's something that definitely involves a lot of thought. The level of interdependence that is core to a team. I don't think we're at the level of robotics or AI where really it's considered a teammate yet. So in fact, I know it's not in a lot of the robotics areas, but even in AI, which tends to be more advanced than robotics at this point, it's still not considered a teammate. So I don't know that the definition would need to change right at this state, but going forward, maybe.
Thank you for everyone for coming, and once again to our wonderful speakers, Professor Susan Simkins as well. Please check out our website, which I've just put in the chat to see our past recorded kind of events. And this is our last speaker series in this semester. Thank you for coming. See you in the fall. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.